So today's focus is really on how do we work with story as a tool for healing. And I want to highlight immediately the language that I just used right away. I didn't say use story. I didn't say how do we use story to do something for us or how to market something for us or how do we use story to tell our story. That's not what we're here for. We're really here for a different way of coming into relationship with story. And so I'm going to be embarking on a journey with you about how do we consider story as an ancient healing tool, as one of the main entities here on this planet that we get to share it with, that really leads us to the center of how to come into practice, almost like a great practice of our humanity. And so we're going to be like, I invite you to take everything that you know about the 6 bullet points for how to create a good story. I invite you to take the hero's journey. I invite you to take everything that you kind of know and just like put it off to the side. You don't have to throw it out. I'm just going to invite you to put it off to the side as we kind of go on another journey about what is story. And so if you can come on video, it is so much fun because the first thing I'll share about storytelling is that we create a collective field in the process of doing it. I did this training and I call it story as ceremony. And it's such a strange name. And it was really the name that came to me for this. And I was like, I'm going to go with it because I know that this is trying to explain something to me. And we're changing the name now, but because you're in the in-between bridge, I want to tell you why this training became called a story as ceremony. How many here have experienced ceremonies before? I'm just curious. Do we have? Okay, right. And so, the way that I've experienced and understand stories is that what's the ceremonies, that one of the things that's happening in that space is that we're creating a collective energetic field. And that energetic field has a container and there's guidelines, there's rituals, there's things that are happening in there, but it's a co-created space. And we can go into ceremony on our own, we can go into ceremony with others, but let's say that when we go into ceremony with others, it's a co-created space that has an energetic field that's being created with intention, often with the intention to heal. Story is the exact same thing. When we talk story together, we are creating an energetic field just right now. Look at the attentiveness. But for those of you who are on video, I'm so appreciating you. I can feel your focus. I can feel the intention of your presence. And that energy is feeding my energy. And my energy is then coming into yours. So we're already in a feedback loop. Now, I just went kind of backwards, right? But when we come to the world of sacred storytelling, the sacred storyteller begins the energetic loop. And so we start the giving cycle. And those who are on the receiving cycle, those who are catching the story, get to receive. And their attention, whatever they're giving back, oftentimes it's applause, it's excitement, it's like, yay, that then feeds a storyteller. And then right there, we're in the cycle of life. And this cycle of life is something that many humans don't get to experience very often anymore in a capitalistic culture, because we're in a cycle of life that many of us kind of get trapped into in the cycle of taking, or the cycle of it's a kind of different kind of exchange. And so I'm starting off in the sort of esoteric way with you right off the bat. So you guys are calling this out. This was not my agenda to start this way. But those who are here often, something in you calls something out. And that practice of being in energetic human body relationship is what storytelling is. And not being very clear and specific. So let's kind of get clear and specific. So what is a story? Let's have a little conversation in terms of, let's just start this out. What is it? What's a story? And I'm asking for you. You guys can put something into chat. You can raise your hand and say something out loud. And we're asking for succinct, like, a phrase, a couple words, but like, what is it? What is a story? What are we here talking about today? I see there's some typing going on. Beautiful thing about this is there's no wrong answer. Connection. So Laura's saying, right, there's that connection that's happening. And we know that, right? Like when you tell your story, something's happening, especially when the person's listening. It's like we create bonds and connections through that. Um, Relaying an event to share and communicate something, right? When we go back to the history of narrative, I just got this yesterday. I have a dear friend who loves etymology, and you probably heard me kind of go off on AI yesterday. AI doesn't like the word story. It likes the word used narrative. But narrative comes from the origin word is gnosis, and it's knowing something that is worth telling. Okay, knowing something that is worth telling. So that's telling you right there that when we use these words, story and narrative, that it's bringing us back to the etymology. It's hinting at this idea that there's a reason that this is worthy of using our life force energy to put into the world. Okay, so we're not just like I'm not just telling you the information of the day. I'm not just telling you what happened, right? And if I'm telling you a story, I'm telling you because it's worthy information to your life. Um, Mary Louise is saying it's telling reflections of growth and change, development of identities, character in this realm. So right, so we reflect, it talks about change. If I'm telling you a story, I'm not telling you as a sacred storyteller. I'm telling you about it because now I'm sharing my journey with you. I'm a storied person. So oftentimes when people talk to me, I can't help but talk back in story. And story, it's not an A to Z information, fact-based experience. It's saying, you're like, well, why are you wearing that shirt today? Well, did you know that my grandmother back in the day had this absolute love affair with lavender? And her love affair with lavender really spread to my mother. And it's the strangest thing, but my mother kind of thinks of lavender. She didn't like that color that much, but she loves this color. And so when I wear this color, I think of the connection between my mom and my grandma, and now I'm telling you history, right? I can't just tell you, well, I got this at the store the other day. That's not what this is about, right? This is about something else. But we live in a time where people don't speak in story, right? We're in the information era. People just want the information, the facts. And so there's a lot of interrupting. There's a lot of disconnection happening constantly when that happens. And, I used to work as a wilderness guide. And when we work in the wilderness guide, every night you sit around the fire. And when you sit around the fire, people start talking story. And there's this something in the culture of that space where it's just kind of known that when someone opens their mouth and they start talking story, it's because they have something to share. And there's this quiet that happens, this receiving of the story, this just presence of listening. There's no interruption. And there's this culture of that. And granted, that's the TV, right? That's the entertainment. So if you're gonna talk story around the fire, it better be good, right? And I moved to San Francisco, the city of information, and it's like there's no space for story because there's a driving energy to get to that facts and information. So I'm saying it's not an easy time in the world to be a storyteller, to talk story, because there's not a lot of people that know how to or how to even recognize when a story has come to their doorstep. So I'm gonna get to something that's kind of like a very not sexy term in terms of how do we talk about story. It used to be that humans used to refer to themselves in reference to the latest technology. So we used to refer to ourselves in reference to machines. So we're kind of used to those metaphors, right? Now, technology, computers, I'm going to use that metaphor. And so let's say that a story is an operating system. Okay. And in that operating system, we learn our values, we learn our belief systems, we learn our expectations, and we learn about possibilities. What should we expect from life? Who should we be when we grow up? What do we think our relationships will look and feel like? And what do we think is possible? So when we think about that, just consider all the different stories that you grew up around the table. Where does your family come from? What is expected of your family? What is expected of you? What kind of jobs should you get? What kind of relationships should you have? How much money should you make? What is acceptable as good, right? All these things come in. Then there's the television shows. What were you raised on television shows? I'm watching Friends right now. Are you watching Friends? I never got to watch it when I was younger, and now Matthew Perry died. So I was like, oh, who is that guy? I want to see what he's all about. What is this phenomenon? And there's just so much drama about the marriage. Monica's getting married and like all the drama around it. And I'm like, wow, what a story that they're putting into an entire generation of what to expect of marriage, you know. So it's what were the stories that we were raised on? And then, of course, the movies. What are we being shown about the future? Whew, are we being inundated by stories that talk about the future? So that's one way. It's a very perverse way of looking at stories, to be honest. And I was walking through the mountains, a couple of years ago as I was developing this kind of content, and the trees. And I'm telling you, it's the trees that had words with me. They're like, Leah, that is the most disgusting expression of story we've ever heard. And I'm like, I know, but people understand it. It makes sense. And they're like, yeah, but you should tell them the truth. And I'm like, oh, I should tell them the truth. What's the truth, trees? And the trees, I swear to God, the trees, I have to give this expression to the credit to the canyon of Topanga Canyon. And the land spoke back and said, well, stories are a library of the soul. And I was like, oh yeah, that is a bigger truth. That stories are a library of the soul. And as I listened for what that meant, what was, Sean Kane says that myths are the earth speaking out loud, and that we are connected to that. We are the voice of earth when we can listen to in that way. And so when Happy birthday to you. Okay. So hold on. Um, I don't know what's going on these days, but every day I've been doing these courses, somebody comes in to interrupt it. I don't know why. But maybe that's just how powerful this kind of work is, that it evokes that. I'm gonna have to ask everyone to come on camera right now. That we can't just have people sitting here not on camera just because we need to see that people are actually here and participating and not doing this strange thing that happens when free classes are offered. If you're not coming on camera right now, I will be removing you out of the space. And it's only because this has now happened several times where people come in and interrupt classes, and that was a minor thing compared to what's been happening. So if you can't show yourself, I'll say you can watch the recording later, and I understand. But I will start removing people right now if you're not on camera. Such a weird thing. I've never had to do this before, but it's something that's just happening with Zoom right now. Um, so I don't know why. Sorry, thank you for your patience. Okay. So there we go. This is just a new kind of world order that we're in right now. I don't understand it. But here's what I'm gonna share is that stories are powerful. And when something comes in to interrupt them, it's worth paying attention to. And interrupting stories is also a very powerful act of what happens. And we love it when some certain stories get interrupted. So let's go with what's happening. And there's anything most powerful that I know about as a storyteller, as a performer, is that you need to be in the moment, right? So I want to have a moment now to speak about. I want to finish what we're talking about in terms of stories. The story of the soul, and then the library of the soul, and then we want to talk about the stories that we're interrupting right now because that's the theme. So when I asked, Earth and being like, okay, what's going on here, and I heard, that stories of the library of the soul. What really came alive and the wonder around that was like, oh, right, that we can share our evolutionary consciousness through our storytelling. I love hearing when people mess up or make a mistake or something like that. It's not that I want to hear about people's bad experiences. That's not it. It's that I love hearing what people learn. It's my favorite thing, because I'm like, man, if you learn that and you figured out how to avoid that pitfall of life, I will soak that in so that when I come to that pitfall, because it's going to happen, like we all come around to all these different pitfalls. And if I get to learn from your experience, then like, may it be so, may it be so. And so that I don't have to, I can go on to the next lesson you know and so this is where we really have this opportunity to have massive radical capacity to learn from each other. And that's where coming to the place of being able to do the hard labor, the hard work of working our stories, of healing through our stories, is not only a service just to ourselves. It not only makes us feel better and be able to live with more peace in the world, but it also really, truly is a part of the evolutionary consciousness of all of our whole collective. So it's a great service when we start working not only with our stories for ourselves, but also with others. So let's talk about interrupting stories. I want to ask you, this is the first thing I wanted to ask you guys today, and I'm going to do a little presentation with you guys, is what story are you in? Like these are really intense times, right? They're just intense times. What story are you finding yourself living in right now? And you can speak it out loud. You can put it in the chat. You can think about climate change. You can think about the changing world order. You can talk about, we're not going to talk about politics, but we're going to, get into the details of that. But like if there's a story that you're living in, we're just going to talk about themes. Okay. We're not going to talk about specifics, but we're talking about themes. And so, what story are you living in right now? Yes, Joe. You're muted though, but I can't hear you.
I'm in a story of sibling rivalry over my mother's death.
Oh, gosh, right. Sibling rivalry.
It's very dark.
Yeah. And sibling rivalry, that's an old story, right? It goes back to the Bible, and it's like it's a really powerful story. And so thank you. Thank you for bringing that in. And the story of whew, like disruption and disruption of family. And there's a whole bunch of things I imagine that you're in. Okay. It's a great example. I saw someone else's hand go up. You can just take yourselves off mute and just say, what's the story? Lori?
Um, yeah, I feel like one of the stories I'm listening to over the winter is this kind of the story of the energies of kind of the conflictual energies that we're being called to uh, work with, which is a sort of the energy of like reduction or kind of utilitarian, reducing things to the binary versus like the a really expansive, the energy of expansive, imaginative, magical possibility. And it's one of the things that's calling me actually right now into storytelling again.
Great.
Um,
So I'm gonna tell me if I've got this. I'm gonna try to simplify this into a way that I
Yeah,
can understand it.
yeah.
So what I'm hearing you say is like it's a very. I'm hearing you say that in some of the stories that you're in, I'm hearing like it's a story of right or wrong, yes or no.
Hmm.
Is that right? When you're saying like the binary of like it's this way or that way.
Hmm.
What you're saying is I want to live in a bigger story. I want to live in a more whole
Well,
story.
I feel like there's a story that's about those two energies in conflict actually or in relationship. So like that there's both things are happening
Yeah.
and yeah, and they're both happening actually at the same time. This is a story about magic unfolding
Yeah.
in the universe and dark matter and all
Yeah.
that. And then yeah.
Yeah. One of the things I love about story is that, and one of the reasons why I love being a storyteller is that we have more access to more parts of any story than most other people. When people go into the world of like, well, that's not true, or this is my truth, Sure, they're accurate. True is a carpentry term. It means a straight line from here to there. That's literally what it means. It's like, is that true? You're looking for the straight line. So that means that like if we're all in a circle and there's a bunch of stuff in the middle of the circle, and I'm saying, well, I can see, the bottle says mana, that's my truth, and I'm right. But the person on the other side is seeing the back of the bottle. And they're saying, yeah, but I can see the ingredients. I'm right. And we're both right, right? Storytellers, what we have capacity to do is we have this capacity to look at the story, and I'm going to show you some examples of that as and we can actually not only move within it to understand all the different roles, but we can also come outside of it to see it in context to other things. And this perhaps is one of the greatest things that we can offer people as storytellers right now. One of the old words for storytellers in Welsh is guide. It's a guide between the dimensions. That's literally the meaning of it. And so that's one of the key roles that we play as storytellers is we guide people into understanding the times that they're living in, the story that we're in. We are the great creators of context, you know. And so, one of the stories that I grew up in was a story of climate change, and that the end times were going to come in my time. We were going to run out of everything, and this whole running out, don't do this, don't that, it's scarcity, the whole, and then the sustainability movement started as a scarcity movement. You can't have that because we got to have this, and then they started to change the story. It wasn't that you can't have this, it's that you can have all these other things and health and wellness. The story slowly began to change. But at first it was like, well, who wants to have less? When our whole thing, our whole system is the story of, Western culture is more. So these are just very small examples of how we can shift the story. Is there anyone else that just wants to share, like, what story are you living in? And is there a story that you're in that you want to interrupt? Because that's sort of our theme for the moment. Is there a story that you're seeing in the world that you're like, that story could handle a disruption, an interruption, for how it's growing? And that can just be something that we stay with today, and that can come up. One of the big things I understand about stories is that they will talk to you. They'll come and they'll offer themselves to you. But you have to be able to have a good question. You have to have a good question. When you have a really good question, it's like the universe can answer it. And if you watch like a bunch of TED Talks or a bunch of really inspirational talks, you'll start to hear this theme. And the theme is often that the speaker was walking with a big question, and the universe came to meet it and answer it. And they often will answer it. What I learned is that they'll often answer it in threes. I was walking with a really big question. The question I was really walking with was, what role am I to play in the healing and restoration of this planet? It's like I was raised, I came in at a really certain time. I was raised with this big story around climate change. I was raised with a specific narrative that we were on a race to save the planet. And I took that question literally to this cliff right here. And I asked that question, just like, and it wasn't just that. I was like, and I'm a human being that has rent to pay. And by the way, I would like to be able to pay my rent, have a little extra. And by the way, I would also, love to have fun. I want to have fun with life. So how do I be a part of saving the planet, have fun and make money, and like, and live a good world in the human way? And I heard an answer back. And I don't know about you, but there's not a lot of times when I prayed when I hear an answer back. So I paid attention, and it said, nothing. And I knew that wasn't me talking. That was not my ego, because I was in my 30s and I was pretty sure I knew everything. And it was like, nothing, and you're in training. Take long walks, take long baths, and listen. And I was like, oh man, I'm in for it. I just wanted to create some kind of sustainable business idea. I just wanted to come out with this, something I could go do, but this was telling me to go be something I'd never done before. Up to that point in my life, I had, I'd been raised in the world of theater. I had gone and worked off Broadway. I had gone to college and got a double major in wilderness leadership and how to use performance as a way of healing in the environment. And I was, editor of the paper, and I was, one of the leaders in our college. I was very externally focused. I needed all the accolades to feel okay about myself. And so now I was being told to do nothing. And it was like a torture sentence to me. But I was like, okay, I had this rare moment in my life where these 10 days where I was on this land. I was house sitting and taking care of it. And so I'll do it. I'll listen. And I walked with that big question. So as I walked with that big question, um, the answer came. And the answer came when I was walking through the woods the very last day through the song of a whale. And I used to tell people I thought I heard a whale singing through the woods, but the truth was I heard a whale singing through the woods. It was the strangest thing. I ran back to my computer to write what I thought would be a pretty poem, and instead I wrote into the night, into the next morning, and I wrote the first 14 chapters of a book that would become known as The Whale Dreamer. And that book really held the big questions that I was walking with. How do we talk about the 6 mass extinction to the next generation of young people and hold them tenderly with love and tell them the world is still beautiful while things are dying? How do we help people face the greatest challenges of our times? How do we recognize that we are actually in a war on the ocean, this thing that is like the greatest sustainer of life? How do we face what, humanity is been kind of stuck into doing on this planet? You know, and that story was the story that gave me a way to talk about love of each other, love of the planet. And it was a big story. And that story required that I go into the wilderness and do a lot of work. So I at the time then I'd been working for Al Gore. I had been producing his Green Channel. I was in the middle of the media in the center of it, covering the UN climate talks. And I was successful in that way. And then it was time for a change, you know. And I realized that that change was about me going back to the truth of who I was as a storyteller. And I got to see something when I was there. I got to see this rare piece of data. I got to see that while I was walking with this big question of all I need to do is give people the information to move them to inspiration, to motivation, to activation. That's what I thought I needed to do to get people engaged in the sustainability movement. Um, and then I realized that after seeing all the data, I was walking with the wrong question because people weren't responding to information. They were responding to story. And so there was this part of myself that I was kind of keeping secret because I didn't think it fit in that mainstream world, which is that the truth of what I was from the very beginning was a storyteller. And so I went back to that part of myself. And I went back to the altar and I was like, okay, well, that's nice that I've got this big novel and it's taking me to the edges of the earth and I'm having to spend all this time in the wilderness and deep listening and learning about what is story as a sacred being. It's a whole other class that I'm not going to get into today. But I went back and I was like, well, now how am I going to pay my bills? I went to the altar and the altar spoke back and it said myth, magic, and medicine, storytelling for new paradigm. And that's really where the center, the foundation of this curriculum that I now teach comes from. I've studied with a lot of great teachers, I'll say that. But I've also, like, a lot of what I know comes from the land. And I'll read it and then I'll go back and I'm like, oh my God, this is known information, about story and work. And if there's anything that I bring to the spaces is this deep entrenched knowing that the wisdom and the knowledge is often with us or accessible to us if we know how to listen, if we know how to engage our tool for instinct, for intelligence, for intuition. So that's a lot of the kind of work that I help people come to, is that deep, solid knowing of the extraordinary capacity that we have as humans. I started teaching and I started teaching these workshops. We started doing these live events. And we started getting deeper and deeper and deeper into the experience of working with story. And I realized that I wasn't working with story for just anything. I was going back to the idea of gnosis, that we were speaking with intention, we were speaking with purpose. And I started to get to know story as a sacred being. That when we come into relationship with story, when we talk about sacred, we're saying, I see the life inside of you. I honor the life inside of you. That means that I can learn from you. That's why we don't ever use the language, I'm going to go use that story. When you follow the word use back into the etymology, it started to creep me out whenever I started to hear that word. So I went back and I followed the trail of etymology, and it comes back to a root word that's connected to the word slavery. And I was like, oh, that's why that bothers me. If I'm going to use a story, I'm going to get the exact minimum out of it that it needs to survive in the world. But if I'm going to come into connection with a story, if I'm going to come into a good relationship with story, if I'm going to respect the dignity of a story, that story is going to start informing me and it's going to start living through me. And that's the thing that I started to learn is that when we tell really big stories, they will come and they will be lived through us. And I learned this, some say the honest way, I would say the hard way, where I started to take on these really big stories of our time. That's why I want to say, what stories are in us? What stories need to be interrupted? I was in a group of women that were learning, priestess learning skills. I was in 13 Moon, where women learn about how to be in relationship with the archetypes. And one woman said, I'm really afraid to use my voice in this world, because I remember the witching times. Those stories are so powerful, and I'm afraid to use my voice. And a week later, I heard another woman who talked about how there was this tale about how some women during the witching times, rather than be burned at the stakes, gave all of their knowledge to the ocean, and the ocean collected that and put it into the Wakame seaweed that could then be given back and restored. And I was like, well, how strange that I've just heard these two stories, back to back. I said that then because I didn't know what I understand now, which is that when we walk with the intention to bring healing to the world, when we walk with the knowing that as what it means to be a storyteller, that things will come. They'll start to come in twos or threes. Threes is the definite, when it comes in three, we're done, right? It's the universe has knocked on the door. It's not knocking, it's pounding. And so I was like, okay, well, what would it be if I'm carrying these two stories in me now? What would it be to find the third story, which is what's the story of that woman that made that sacred contract with the Wakame? And so I went to the ocean and I asked that question, you know, who was that being that made that sacred contract? And a story emerged. And we said, okay, well, let's go tell that story, and we'll tell the story in ceremony, and we'll give Wakame back to the people who are ready to receive and shift this story and call in the new story of our time. And I thought that no one would come. I thought maybe 13 people would come to our first event. 60 people came to our first event. This story was done with Starhawk, and it was 200 people came. And we came to really bring healing to this greater story that we're living with. And the thing that I learned about this was how powerful stories are. And I can't go into the depth of the story. I do that in the great training that we do. But one of the things I learned is that when we start holding stories, and powerful stories, that there is an energetic being that you're coming into relationship with, and that there's a lot of things that you need to do as a guardian of your own temple, this temple of your being, the temple of your consciousness. There's a lot of things that you need to know about releasing energy. There's a lot of things that you need to understand about the projections, the power of what happens when you're the one on the pedestal holding the archetypal frequency of a story, and what happens when all that energy comes towards you, and how to clear that and release that. And that's one of the things that I was really learning, that I was like, oh my gosh, no one, when they talk about storytelling, even in all my professional training in theater, no one was talking about the risks involved with getting up and talking story. And I began to really respect people more and more who had fear around this, because I was like, I actually think there's something in their animal body that understands something that their maybe mind doesn't know, and that we haven't done enough education around. So I got really involved in really helping people understand the energetic nature of what's happening when we're talking story with each other. So I began to understand stories as these energetic beings, and they have a life form of their own. And you understand what happens when you kind of walk into a room and someone walks in the room of a bad story, or scary story, or fear-driven story, and what energy that brings into the space. Same thing with joy. When someone walks in and they've got joy, and you're able to be in joy, it can spread. But then you can also feel like if you're shut down to joy, isn't that person so annoying? It's like you can really understand what's happening when, I love this. These drawings are drawn by Mark Smith, in terms of being able to see that all these stories have energetic bodies, and we affect the space that we're in based on the stories that we tell, on the energy that we bring into the room. But there's something else that's happening when we're sharing stories, and that there's a lot of unconscious agreements that can take place. And that's one of the pieces that I really wanted to talk about, because here we have this energetic body. And I was just working with a client the other day, and she's like, yeah, my friend just comes in, she just dumps her stories on me. Listen to the language. I love, one of my teachers, Stephen Jenkinson, says, language never lies. you know? And right, some people can come in with a heavy load and they're like, here, you take it. I don't want it to be, or I want to share this with you, or I don't want to be in this alone, right? And then what happens to you, especially if you're a therapist, a coach, or just a very empathetic person or a friend, and you're like, I'll sit with that with you. But then really pay attention. How do you feel on the other side of that? And if you started to take on their story, and a lot of our great healers get really sick because of this one piece of that so many people aren't taught about needing to have energetic boundaries between the stories. And so that's one of the great things that we keep using this word great. I love it. It just keeps coming out. It's one of the great things that we focus on in the training that I'll be talking about. So I wanted to show you a little bit about how do we work with story and trauma. And basically one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to get off the racetrack. We're trying to get out of the trauma of a story. And one of the things that we understand now is that there can be these neural pathways and they can go over and over and over again. And when traumatic events happen, we want to help people get out of that. We want to help people get off the racetrack. And so this is one, I'm going to introduce you to a modality that we go into great detail with, but just to kind of give you an idea of how do we break the cycle. So something happened. I'm on Maui right now. There's a massive traumatic event that happened here, the fires. And really almost every resident that I have come into contact with has been traumatized, whether they were directly impacted, their community was impacted, and it's just very big here. So, but that could have happened, or it could have been, some kind of physical assault. It could have been abandonment. It could have been sudden loss of something. It's like there's an incident that's happened. When we go into working with story as a tool for healing, this is different than what we're talking about the gnosis. We're talking about I talk story because I have something worth sharing. Okay, that's different. We're talking about something different now. We're talking about working really with story as a tool for healing. We understand that something happened and there's an energetic response that's happening in the body, right? We know stories as energetic beings. And so there's something that's now they're holding, they're holding this incident, they're holding this happening. And so the very first step is to witness. It's a witnessing, receiving story circle. And this is that place where it's listening. It's listening with the intention to witness. And this is when the first place of having the distinction between absorbing someone else's story and being able to have a really strong energetic boundary that says, I can witness a story. What happens when we go into these unconscious agreements is we could be unconsciously communicating to that person that we don't believe in them enough or trust them enough to do their own powerful process of alchemizing, integrating, and transforming that energy. If we're like, oh, here, I'll take that on for you energetically. These are the things that can happen unconsciously behind the scenes. And so one of the greatest things that we can do in giving someone dignity that's gone through a traumatic event is to stand as a powerful witness and just to receive. And we don't ask questions. We don't ask for more information, even though our information brain is like, well, that happened at 5, the next thing happened at 8. Well, what happened in between? That's not what it's about. It's really about listening to this person's experience and giving them a place to share it. And something happens when they do that. They can hear it out loud. It starts to move outside of themselves. You've probably had that experience sometimes when you share something really traumatic. It feels good. You're like, whew, it's not just me sharing that anymore. It's like, and especially when it's someone that can really hear it and receive it. But in some situations, when we do certain kinds of things, we say, well, what if we tell that story for the very last time in that way? We're trying to heal the neural pathways. We don't want to get them in a stuck cycle. So we go and we don't pretend like anything is by ourselves, and we go into the land of ritual. And so when we do this, in the classes, we'll actually go and we'll start engaging the natural world. We'll engage song, we'll engage, some kind of ritual action of cleansing, purifying, releasing. And that's this piece of we can't do it by ourselves. We're not designed to do it by ourselves. Healing doesn't happen by ourselves. Change doesn't happen by ourselves. It's like it didn't happen by yourself, so you can't heal it by yourself. And that's this coming back into community. And it's something that, is getting more and more desperate in our modern day world. Then we come into this next stage. where we actually release the story as we know it. And this is the biggest aspect of magic that I can explain to you. And it's hard to explain, but we take this story and we take it out of the human experience and we throw it into the mythic dimension. And Michael Maid says that behind this dimension is the mythic dimension. And it's where this whole reality is playing out, but in symbol myth, a symbol, metaphor, and archetype. And all of a sudden we can start to get some distance from the story. And all of a sudden we can actually see we're entering into another kind of story, and it's the story of our soul. We might begin to reweave kind of what this means to our human experience when we start to look at it as a soul story. It's really hard to explain. It's much easier to get to experience. I've seen extraordinary things happen for people in this way. So you come out with the story of our soul, and then when you come out of that, you're able to bring it back, and you now have a new way to tell the story. It's a bigger story. And you're different because of what you've discovered about yourself in the process of telling it. You might have discovered that you had strengths that were developed that you couldn't see until you were on the other side. You might see that there are parts of you that had to be released and let go of, especially in health crisis. It's really a powerful process when people have health crisis, that something had to be released, something had to be let go of in order to access this other incredible, almost superpower or thing. And people also understand that the world it's often there and supports them in ways that they can't see until they come back and tell the story. So it's a way to really be able to see the wholeness of one's life when we pause, reflect, and explore it. This is a really important part of the story that I think is in Western world and all this, we've really been taught so much about, you know, personal development and self-exploration and me and do and all this stuff and one-on-one. And I once heard the story about how the UN was going into a place in Africa that had been deeply traumatized by genocide, and they brought them into these like white rooms with fluorescent lights, and they were trying to get them to talk about their feelings. And this indigenous tribe was like, no, the way that we work through trauma is through dancing and through singing together and drumming. And so they went and they sang and they cried and they danced and they sang and they danced and they cried. And that was their healing experience. And I think that there's a very powerful, potent, deep wisdom about we heal in community. And it's not just about talking about our feelings, it's about moving that energy through dance, through song. So it's this great alchemy of bringing both the beauty to the horror that can really bring healing. So we started exploring more and more with these like group healing experiences. This was the story of Medea, and it was about betrayal. And we ended up doing this process with over 200 people where they got to face one-on-one to each other, and we did this massive Ho'oponopono experience. Again, I didn't realize how powerful this was. I didn't realize how powerful it was until like I couldn't quite function in the world in a normal way for the next week. Things had gotten so rattled, because we rattled and we shook this very, very old story. We brought healing to it. And it's kind of a crazy story, but one of the things that happened with that particular story was that the story, the way that it had been carried was absolute fiction. But the story of Medea is that she killed her children. So I can't go into the depths of this, but when you go back and you watch the history, you realize that the playwright was paid off to write the story that she had killed her children, when really it was the villagers of the king who she had really messed with, had killed her children, and then paid the playwright to tell the story in a different way. And that story was coming in and saying, please bring healing to me. Please address this story of betrayal in this way. And it was another way that I started to really understand the esoteric magic of healing these big stories. So just a little bit about me and how we got here. We started obviously doing those in-person events, but we also started doing a lot of events on Zoom, and we've done, amazing events, and we've been doing a lot of teaching. And one of the things I've learned is that, while there's nothing quite like getting to be in person, it's really powerful what we can do as a collective field in this space. That's why I often ask people to turn on their videos, because we can start to feel each other and know each other. This story right here is, I want to tell you the story, and it's one of the stories I'll leave you with today. This is my nephew James, and James is come in. Sometimes people have a lot to learn at the beginning of life, and James is one of those beings, and he's had a lot to learn about how to be in relationship to people, and he lives in New England, and he was at camp. And the camp was literally on an island off of Massachusetts, and he got kicked off the island, and he got kicked out of camp. And talk about rough, right? Oh my gosh. So I was visiting that week, and me and my brother, you know, got in his boat. We went to go pick up James. And I'm thinking, oh man, this is such a hard thing for a kid, God, that kind of rejection and shame. And I'm just thinking how hard it must be on him. And so we get up there, and my brother goes off to talk to the main director of the program, and I decided to go for a walk with James, and James is great. He's in a great mood. James is like, do you have any idea how much responsible the director has? And I'm like, no, tell me. He's like, he is so responsible for all these people, and like what it is to be on an island, all the different programs that he does, and all the different kinds of kids that are there, and he shows me all the different things that the director does, and James is in a great space. He's really proud. He's proud of himself. He's proud of his relationship with this guy. He can't wait to come back tomorrow. And I'm like, whoa, what just happened? So we're walking out, and I talk to the director, and I'm like, what did you do to my nephew? Like, you kicked him off, but he feels like really good about himself, and he can't wait to come back. Like, what happened? And he said, I've learned that kids cannot walk away feeling ashamed. They have to know that they're welcome back. They have to know that there's a place for them to come back to, and that they're wanted. And that when they leave that way, they can come back and reintegrate in a really powerful way. And I was like, I don't know who you are, Jude, but you've got the biggest wisdom teachings that I've heard in a long time, and these are the kind of anecdotes that I feel like are really important to share together. And when we talk about this training, I'll tell you a little bit more about, these are the kinds of stories that we get to collectively share from our experience, or what are the things that we've learned along the way that are keystone teachings, well, that will potentially save us in key moments, because there's always going to be a time and a moment when we have to kick someone out of the space, when we have to say, no, there's a boundary here, and you're welcome back. But, how do we not and continue that cycle of shame? I'm going to skip through this because we're coming into relationship with time, but I do want to tell you about the training that's coming up. And this is, what I love doing is I love bringing in guest mentors, people who are really absolute specialists at what they do and can really guide you in opening new portals of understanding and really bring more depth into your work as a practitioner and as a storyteller in your own life and your own reality. And so these are examples of the teachers that are going to be with us. GOT Maj, one of the most important things I love doing is going back to the prophecies and rituals, really understanding what is ceremony from an Indigenous perspective. You'll get to work with, people who will really give you practical, tangible skills to help learn about working with your own energetic bodies and other people's. You're also it's like we can't meet these times and not be talking about what we're coming around race, around sexual identity. And so we'll get to have a session where you get to experience that, and how do we talk about that in a story. And then, because we are human beings, not human doings, we're going to have movement. So even though it's a 2.5-day training, that's in front of the computer, we do a lot of movement, we do a lot of action. And so we get to have that integrated. I'm not going to go too deep into this because I want to make time for us, but really one of the things that we focus on is, what does it mean to be a guardian of the temple of consciousness? And that's what we are when we're storytellers. We have access to people's consciousness in ways that a lot of other people don't get access to. Where people, when as soon as you start saying once upon a time, those magical words, so many people melt. They open to receiving you. And it's an incredibly powerful role to get to play when you start to introduce new ideas, new ways of being, new paradigms into that space. So who are you as a guardian of that temple of consciousness? That's one of the things that we're going to want to have an opportunity to define. And you'll also walk out with like really clear understanding of what do we mean when we're talking about story as ceremony. when we create this energetic field that we can heal in, what are the responsibilities to that? How do you do it? You know, how do you hold ritual? How do you be in relationship to old stories and new stories? You'll get to experience an actual story ceremony. That's how we open our training. And the story that I'll share with you is the secret story of Earth and how the stars got their names. It's a very fun story, and it's going to help you explore your own soul contracts for what it means to be alive in these times, and what it means to be in this time of the story of climate change. And it's a pretty awesome experience. And then I also explain these guys to you. So I'm going to leave you with one story, and oops, that story didn't go. Well, I'm not going to leave you that story apparently, but I will leave you with this, and it's one of my favorite quotes of all time. Act as if you are people of consequence, so that I can treat you as such, and that you matter. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence? I know, it's a big one. I'm gonna read that one more time because it's a big question. What must have happened to people who unconsciously agreed that the best presence in this world is to have no consequence? It's a velvet gauntlet, this idea of being a consequence. It doesn't clink when it hits the ground, but you can feel it. And it would be proper to proceed as if there is consequence to us being here. That's Stephen Jenkinson. So, you know, what we're up to is creating this training. And I've been working with people in terms of how to tell their own stories for a really long time, for almost over a decade now. And when it came to my own evolution, you know, in terms of the journey of working as a sacred storyteller and being a practitioner of story, it became really clear that given what's happening now in the world, that we actually need more and more people on board who are really standing up to help other people um, be in the story of our time. You work with this ancient healing tool and engage it, and how to be guides and guardians of our consciousness. And so that's what this 3-day training that I'll be doing is really focused on. It's really focused on helping the helpers, helping those who really want to be showing up for others. And you can't help but work through all your own stories in the process. So you'll get to learn how to tell wisdom stories, how to tell teaching stories, how to help other people tell their stories, but also learning how to tell your own. And so I'll give you the link to this event, and I'll stay on for questions and things like that. And I can also kind of get into, you know, the logistics of what we're covering, if that would help people. I'm going to stop talking. I never talk this much during an actual training, just so you know. They are very interactive. We're doing a lot of small work group, a lot of work with each other. That's the real bulk of it. And so it's coming up in March. And what this is it's actually part of a 5-part program. This is the introductory training. So you're going to get like kind of an introduction to all 5 parts. And throughout the time, you're going to really understand what does it mean to hold old stories that are yours, how to hold old stories from your own culture, how to hold the stories of our time. But really, as I shared with you, it's really about how to support other people and working with story as a tool for change. And so when the next thing happens, and things will happen, right? Fires are going to happen, floods will happen. Oh my God, California right now, you know, that you will be able to be there, to be part of the healing force. So that's our talk for today. Are there any questions that people have or thoughts that are lingering that have come alive in this? The last thing I'll share is that when you register the next 48 hours, if you feel inspired to, you get a bonus gift, which is I include our entire master teacher library. And it's kind of amazing. It's over 108 hours of trainings of all of our guest teachers that have come through the school in the last 5 years. So it's pretty epic. Joe, it is live. And what we do is it's also all recorded and it's all different modules. So you get the schedule of all the different teachings and different modules and the guest teachers. And the reality is what I'll tell you is that the training is designed like a journey. So it builds on itself and it gets, it's like and it gets more and more intimate because you have so much one-on-one experience with different people. And we're in this wild modern world, and sometimes people can't make it to every single session, and that's kind of the beauty of an online training. So while I would always say, plan on being there for the entire thing, and that is when when we did this in January, what I would say is like people really spoke about it being a very powerful initiatory experience, that they went on this really big journey together, and people came out doing the most amazing things. This one, in terms of who was there, there was, I can think of a lot of therapists were there. One woman, she worked in Parliament. She worked in policy. She created so many P's in this word. She created policy for the Parliament of Portugal, and she brought the sacredness of the storyteller's prayer into that space. And I was like, wow, that is something I never would have thought of, you know. And so that's the thing, that I'm so inspired by the kinds of people um who are part of that. So Siona, did I just say your name correctly?
Yes, you did. You said it
Okay.
perfectly. Thank you.
So will cover energetic boundaries and releasing. So it absolutely covers energetic boundaries, yes, and then clearing. So I want to be specific because releasing to me associates something, and clearing connects to another. And so we do a lot of work on boundaries and clearing. Absolutely. Um, that's good, Laura. We're coming to a close. Pleasure to see you. Any other questions that are emerging? Okay. So the one other thing that I'll mention is that one of the kind of beautiful things about these trainings is the community. And that is something that people always tell me about, that there is something about getting to be with other people that are drawn to this kind of work and the connections that are created in that space. And so even though the training is only 3.5 days, we have 4 different times throughout the year where we'll come in and we'll do a 2-hour check-in. So that's one of the ways that you can continue to, like, how do you put this into practice? The first training is a lot of information. You'll get to be exposed to a lot of different modalities and things. And then the next 4 trainings are totally committed to getting to dive deep into each one of those. And so what you'll do is it's a combination of helping others while also fine-tuning your own tool as a storyteller. So it's really an merging of both. So this first training is that introduction. Then the next training will be really focused on the voice and how to use our voice in the world. Some amazing guest teachers will be coming in for that, while also always using about how to support other people in using their voice. So again, it's this really kind of fun conglomerate training of how do you develop your own skill and capacity while in the tension of supporting others. Okay. The other, hi, Shauna.
Mhm. Well, yeah, I have something that might not be relevant for anyone else, so I could reach out to you afterwards. But if we're just here, anyway, I have a question about something that I'm doing and whether it would be, if there's another offering that you're providing that might be perfect for that.
Yeah. Let's hold just for a second, and if there's anything left here, and then otherwise we can all sign up. Any other questions? Okay, well, I invite you to take yourselves off mute and say farewell. Have a lovely day. And hopefully we'll get to see you in March if this is resonant for you.
Mm.
And I look forward to seeing you there, Shauna. And until we hope.
Hmm.
Good night, everyone.
Good night. That was good. Bye.